Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another video about magic in theory and practice. Today we're diving into Chapter 9 of Silence and Secerecy, and of the Barbarous Names of Evocation. On a greater level than the four powers of the Sphinx, silence is the ultimate nature beyond the veils of the Tree of Life. It is the state of being beyond being, for existence was made by the Word. In this chapter, I will analyze the power of silence and dissect secrecy as a connected concept to silence, for keeping a secret requires silence and no more. But I will do my best, as always, to provide other source material on both concepts to give full accounts of everything that is brought to our attention in this chapter. The chapter begins, quote, "It is found by experience, confirming the statement of Zoroaster, that the most potent conjurations are those in an ancient and perhaps forgotten language, or even those couched in a corrupt and possibly always meaningless jargon. Of these there are several main types. The preliminary invocation in the Goetia consists principally of corruptions of Greek and Egyptian names. For example, we find Asoranophris for Asar un Nefer," end quote, as well as Enochian and ancient tongues. First off, you may see my video on Liber Samek and the Bornless One for further information on those rites. Secondly, you will notice that whether it is mantra or invocations, often is employed old or made-up languages. There are several reasons for the employ of such terminology. For one thing, you must know the translation of what you utter and all of its connotations in your own language. Word carries many meanings, not just its definitions and etymology, but also cultural uses which become embroiled in the words you are speaking, which consciously and unconsciously triggers meanings much deeper to the mind of the one speaking them. Not to mention the magical meanings of each letter of each word, which is also triggers many forces. So why then use a foreign language? The answer is simple. It affects the conscious mind and creates a pattern of neurons which allow for a state of trance and unconscious working of the mind to override the conscious. It essentially creeps the brain out in the right way. The Enochian language, on the other hand, works much differently. It is in itself a magical language, one that by merely speaking causes magic to occur, especially more so when used to invocate or conjure. It is a very advanced form of magic, and outlining any more on the subject requires its own videos, and quite a few of those. Ancient tongues, on the other hand, are different than either barbarous words or Enochian. Some are rooted in magic, such as ancient Hebrew and Greek with Kabbalistic correspondences. But they also have vulgar use by people of those cultures who were speaking the tongues but were not initiated. Whether Egyptian, Greek, or Latin form, invocations, as opposed to normal speech, quote, "are very sonorous, and there is a certain magical voice in which they should be recited," end quote. This may come naturally right off, or it can be taught either by another or experience. This next bit of tid is thrown into the chapter, and I thought it funky enough to mention. Quote, "Other methods of incantation are on record as efficacious. For instance, Frater I.A., when a child, was told that he could invoke the devil by repeating the Lord's Prayer backwards. He went into the garden and did so. The devil appeared and almost scared him out of his life," end quote. Frater I.A. is Alan Bennett. I don't doubt that if one truly believes in what they are doing and have a desired intent for the duration, they can make anything a magical invocation or evocation, such that many take the Necronomicon seriously. Myself, I prefer real magical text as opposed to fiction, but to each their own. Quote, "It is therefore not quite certain in what efficacy of conjurations really lies. The particular mental excitement required may even be aroused by the perception of the absurdity of the process and the persistence in it," end quote. Quote, "It may be conceded in any case that the long strings of formidable words which roar and moan through so many conjurations have a real effect in exalting the consciousness of the magician to the proper pitch. With all such words, it is of the utmost importance that they should never be spoken until the supreme moment, and even then they should burst from the magician almost despite himself. So great should be his reluctance to utter them. In fact, they should be the utterance of the God in him at the first onset of the divine possession. So uttered, they cannot fail of effect, for they have become the effect." End quote. Crowley goes on to say that wise magi will inevitably create their own words. He gives an example, which he used in his invocation of Taff Batharath from the equinox. This word, and forgive my pronunciation, this word is, quote, Stibetechefemifichis, end quote. I'll spell that. Stibettephemifichis. It represents a line descending in a certain manner from Kether down the pillar of severity to Malkuth, which you could see the photo on your screen. One should experiment with such in the course of their magical career. They may even discover some word worthy of the grade of Magus if they are diligent. The author then goes on to outline the power of persistence and repetition. Say something enough and it gains momentum and connotations which add flair and life to a word. Quote, "Persistence is the only quality required for success," end quote. Which, this reminds me of the 3rd edition of the Golden Dawn book by Israel Regardie, which has a page in the forefront that reads, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education is not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent." And this brings us from persistence in speech to secrecy. Quote, "The opposite formula is that of secrecy. An idea is perpetuated because it must never be mentioned. A Freemason never forgets the secret words entrusted to him, though these words mean absolutely nothing to him in the vast majority of cases. The only reason for this is that he has been forbidden to mention them, although they have been published again and again, and are as accessible to the profane as to the initiate." End quote. So, why hold such things secret? Many of today's secret societies have been infiltrated and their secret initiations published so that anyone can read them. Well, this is for several reasons. One, if you can hold secret a word that has little to no value to you, it proves a little trust is in order. If you can't even keep your mouth shut about your initiation, then there is no way you could be trusted at all. Further, it is a discipline. You learn how to keep your mouth shut, which a lot of people today do not know how to do, especially with social media and how many imbecilic ideas going from what we call a sorry excuse for a brain with no filter out on a digital platform. Knowing that you cannot do something, or say something in this case, makes you want to do it or say it. So there is a lifelong discipline in keeping secrets. Lastly, it protects the uninitiated from exposure. If they want to learn, they should take the initiation. If not, it is not their business. Going into initiation without knowledge of what will happen leads to both anticipation and even a little fear, a knowledge that you are not in control. All of that is required for an initiation to actually work. If you read the initiation prior, you cannot experience those things, and it spoils the entire ordeal. So you're actually helping people and giving them the proper initiation by not putting out to them what's going to happen, keeping those secrets. Briefly, Crowley switches back to the effect of word on the brain and then to some notes about the ego and absorption of the ego into deity by ritual. He closes the chapter by quoting a very lengthy portion of his diary. I suggest reading it on your own. Instead, I am skipping all of that and going into the subject of silence. As I said, silence is the key ingredient for secrecy. And as I've explained secrecy, what is silence? I will go as far as to attempt to answer what is speech in the silence and silence in speech. First off, silence is the fourth power of the Sphinx, attributed to earth, as fire is to will and air is to water. It is a physical condition, but so much more than that. It is the very core of being, the seed of spirit deep within all. Essentially, it is the condition of no thing, for anything below the veils has vibration. I will now quote from Little Essays Towards Truth on the chapter of silence. Of all the magical and mystical virtues, Of all the grace of the soul, of all the attainments of the spirit, none has been so misunderstood, even when at all apprehended, as silence. It would not be possible to enumerate the common errors. Nay, it may be said that to think of it at all is in itself an error. For its nature is pure being, that is to say, nothing, so that it is beyond all intellection and intuition. Thus, then, the utmost of our essay can be only a certain wardenship, as it were a tiling of the lodge wherein the mystery of silence may be consummated. For this attitude there is sound traditional authority. For Hippocrates, god of silence, is called the Lord of defense and protection. But his nature is by no means that negative and passive silence which the word commonly connotes. For he is the all-wandering spirit, the pure and perfect knight-errant, who answers all enigmas and opens the closed portal of the king's daughter. But silence in the vulgar sense is not the answer to the riddle of the Sphinx. It is that which is created by the answer. For silence is the equilibrium of perfection, so that Hippocrates is the omniform, the universal key to every mystery soever. When we inquire more closely into his symbolism, the first quality which engages our attention is doubtless his innocence. We must understand, first of all, that the root of moral responsibility on which man stupidly prides himself as distinguishing him from the other animals is restriction, which is the word of sin. Indeed, there is truth in the Hebrew fable that the knowledge of good and evil brings forth death. To regain innocence is to regain Eden. We must learn to live without the murderous consciousness that every breath we draw swells the sails which bear our frail vessels to the port of the grave. We must cast out fear by love. Seeing that every act is an orgasm, their total issue cannot be but birth. Also, love is the law. Thus, every act must be righteousness and truth. For until we become innocent, we are certain to try to judge our will by some canon of what seems right or wrong. In other words, we are apt to criticize our will from the outside, whereas true will should spring, a fountain of light, from within and flow unchecked, seething with love into the ocean of life. This is the true idea of silence. It is our will which issues, perfectly elastic, sublimely protean, to fill every interstice of the universe of manifestation, which it meets in its course. So, there is much more in the small book on the subject of silence, but I think we all get the point now. It is very much aligned with the way of the Tao. To do no thing is to do one's will. It is to be enraptured by silence. A valid first step in the right direction to such a state is to quiet the mind, then to root out and destroy all fear, then to quiet the mind. One doing their will does not think, they do. They are past instinct. They are riding the current of will, and it ushers forth their being, gliding with them from instant to eternity. What then is speech in the silence, and silence in speech as posed by the AA? Let's tackle the first. Note that nowhere did Crowley openly elucidate these terms. I cannot then draw off supported text. I can only speculate. These three terms apply to the teaching of AA, specifically to the three orders within AA. Marked by passage into Malkuth for the first order, passage into Tifereth for the second order, and passage above the abyss for the third order. Speech in the silence is then attributed to the first order, and it could be summed up as learning to listen to the voice of the angel, learning to recognize its hand in your life and see how it paved the path you walk upon. It calls to you through the Spirit. Also, there may be a slight nod in the term to the state of being of the neophyte. They seek teachings, which of course stem from the mind of other magicians more experienced. They seek written and oral word to help them achieve attainment. Speech in the silence can then be interpreted as verbal teachings to learn about the void of spirit. Silence is a condition of the adept. They begin serious attainment of their HGA. This is symbolized by the holy hexagram. The blue ascending triangle is the adept passively calling and yearning towards the highest. The red descending triangle is the fire of Godhead descending down upon the adept to interlace with them. All of this takes place internally, all within the soul of the adept. It is just silence, meditation, and waiting, quieting the mind. Then, silence in speech is for the third order. I see this as though one has attained, they are incapable of verbalizing anything about their experience as it is beyond the mind. They exist in the void and world simultaneously. Also, what they say is often unable to be properly understood by those below. When they speak truth, it falls upon deaf ears or ears which do not understand what they mean at all. Now, a last note. This is why true secrets cannot be spoken in the occult. You cannot verbalize God. It is beyond all things of speech. And so it is silence. Love is the law. Love under will. I'll see y'all in the next one.